Before we speak of success, let us speak of something far more dangerous ourselves. Not the version we show the world, polished and practiced, but the one behind closed doors, the one that reacts too quickly, spends too carelessly, speaks without thinking, and thinks without control. Because the truth is, most people are not held back by lack of opportunity, but by lack of discipline within. And until you learn to command your mouth, steady your mood, guide your money, and master your mind, you will always be fighting battles you created yourself. But the moment you take control of these four, something shifts. Power returns, clarity awakens, and the unstoppable version of you finally begins to rise. Your mood is your silent reputation before you even speak, and it travels faster than your words ever could. Long before people hear your ideas or understand your intentions, they feel your presence. It arrives in the way you carry yourself, in the softness or sharpness of your energy, in the ease or tension that follows you into a room. You may believe you are being judged by what you say, but in truth, you are first received by what you feel. A restless mood creates distance even in silence, while a steady one creates comfort without effort. People may not always be able to explain why they trust one person and withdraw from another, but often it is because mood speaks a language older than words, one that the body cannot hide. When your inner state is unsettled, everything around you begins to mirror that disturbance. Conversations become heavier than they need to be. Small problems feel larger than they are, and even simple moments lose their ease. A disturbed mood does not stay contained within you. It spills quietly into your tone, your reactions, your timing, and the space between your responses. On the other hand, when your mood is grounded, even challenges begin to soften. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of interrupt. You pause instead of explode. This is not about pretending everything is fine, but about not allowing everything to define you at once. Because moods, if left unchecked, become habits, and habits eventually become how the world remembers your presence. There is also a quiet responsibility in understanding that your mood does not only belong to you, it influences every environment you enter. The people around you, whether they admit it or not, adjust themselves to your emotional state. A calm presence can lower tension in a room without a single instruction, while an unstable one can create unease even in moments of peace. This is why mastering your mood is not about control in the restrictive sense, but about awareness. It is about noticing what rises within you before it becomes something you release into the world. Because when you learn to govern your inner climate, you stop being a victim of every passing storm inside you, and instead become the quiet force that decides what energy you carry forward. A single word, once released, does not return to the place it came from. It travels outward carrying intention, but it often arrives carrying interpretation. And in that gap between what you meant and what was understood, entire relationships can shift. The tongue is small, yet it holds the ability to shape atmospheres, to soften hearts, or to harden them beyond repair. Many underestimate it because it requires no physical strength, no visible effort, no warning before it acts. But its impact is immediate and sometimes irreversible. In moments of emotion, it becomes easy to forget that speech is not just expression, it is construction. Every sentence either builds understanding or builds distance. There are words spoken in anger that take years to undo, and words spoken in awareness that become foundations for trust. The difference is never in vocabulary alone, but in control. When speech is guided by impulse, it often serves the moment, but damages the future. When it is guided by intention, it may require patience in the present, but it protects what matters in the long run. This is why silence is not weakness, but refinement. It is the ability to hold back what does not need to be released, to let emotions settle before it becomes language, Those who master this do not speak less because they lack thought, but because they respect the weight of thought before it becomes sound. At the same time, the tongue is not only a tool of destruction, it is also one of restoration. A carefully chosen sentence can repair what misunderstanding has broken. A sincere apology can reopen doors that pride once closed. A word of encouragement can reach someone at the exact moment they are ready to give up. This is the dual nature of speech. It can divide or it can heal, depending on the hand that guides it. And the hand, in this case, is awareness. When awareness is present, words become deliberate rather than accidental, and communication becomes a bridge instead of a battlefield. To control the tongue is to understand that not every reaction deserves a voice, and not every emotion deserves immediate release. It is to recognize that restraint is not suppression, but strength in its most refined form. Because anyone can speak in a moment of fire, but it takes maturity to let that fire cool before it becomes language. And when that maturity is practiced consistently, something shifts quietly within a person. Their words begin to carry weight not because they are many, but because they are measured. Money does not respond to desire the way people often believe it should. It does not arrive simply because it is wanted, nor does it remain because it is needed. It follows patterns, structure, and most importantly, discipline. Desire can inspire movement, but it cannot sustain it. Many people begin their financial journey with strong intention, hoping for change, imagining stability, and dreaming of freedom. Yet without discipline, those intentions often dissolve into habits that quietly work against them. Money is not emotional. It does not adjust itself to urgency or frustration. It moves according to how it is handled, and it reflects the consistency of the one who manages it. When discipline is absent, money becomes unpredictable in one's life. It enters, but it does not stay. It is earned, but not retained. It is spent faster than it is understood. In such a pattern, financial growth becomes difficult, not because opportunities are missing, but because structure is missing. Every decision made in moments of impulse creates a ripple that eventually shapes stability. A single choice to spend without awareness may seem small in the moment, but repeated over time, it becomes the reason balance is lost. This is how money quietly reveals character, not through how much is earned, but through how it is treated when no one is watching. Discipline, on the other hand, introduces order into this relationship. It creates boundaries where impulse once led, and clarity where confusion once existed. When a person begins to treat money with awareness, something subtle changes. Spending becomes intentional rather than emotional. Saving becomes consistent rather than occasional. Planning replaces reaction. It is not about restriction, but about direction. Money begins to feel less like something that disappears and more like something that grows under careful attention. This shift does not happen instantly, but it becomes powerful over time as small disciplined choices accumulate into stability. There is also a deeper truth within this idea that extends beyond numbers and accounts. Discipline with money often reflects discipline in life itself. The way a person handles resources mirrors the way they handle time, energy, and decisions. When control is present in financial habits, it often begins to appear in other areas as well. There is less chaos in choices, less regret in hindsight, and more awareness in the present moment. Money, in this sense, becomes a teacher rather than just a tool. It shows where patience is lacking, where impulse is strong, and where growth is still needed. Over time, those who understand this relationship begin to experience money differently. It is no longer chased in desperation or feared in uncertainty. Instead, it is guided with intention. And in that guidance, stability begins to form, not because money has changed, but because the approach toward it has matured. Discipline turns money from something unpredictable into something structured, and in that structure, freedom slowly begins to take shape. A restless mind rarely appears destructive at first. It often feels active, alert, even productive. Thoughts move quickly, ideas overlap, and the sense of urgency creates an illusion of progress. But beneath that constant motion, something essential begins to weaken. Focus disappears not in a single moment, but gradually, as attention is divided into too many directions at once. What could have been shaped with depth begins to scatter into fragments. And in that scattering, the true potential of thought is lost, not because it never existed, but because it was never given the space to settle. When the mind is restless, it becomes difficult to stay with one idea long enough for it to mature. It starts something with energy, but abandons it midway for something that feels more urgent, more interesting, or more immediate. Over time, this pattern creates a life filled with beginnings but lacking completion. The irony is that the mind does not lack intelligence, it lacks stillness. And without stillness, even the strongest ideas remain undeveloped, like seeds constantly uprooted before they can grow roots. Focus, in contrast, allows a single direction to deepen. It transforms scattered energy into structured effort and effort into meaningful progress. There is also a quiet cost to restlessness that is often overlooked. It does not only affect productivity, it affects clarity. When thoughts are constantly shifting, it becomes harder to recognize what truly matters. Priorities begin to blur. Decisions become reactive rather than intentional. The mind starts responding to everything instead of choosing what deserves attention. In that state, life feels busy but directionless. Many people mistake this busyness for importance, yet deep inside, there is often a sense of unfinished potential, as if something greater is always just out of reach. A focused mind, however, carries a different presence. It does not rush to respond to every distraction. It learns to observe before engaging, to filter before reacting, and to commit before changing direction. This does not mean the absence of thought, but the refinement of it. Focus gives thought a destination. It allows energy to accumulate instead of scatter, and in that accumulation, strength begins to form. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, not because the challenge has changed, but because the mind has learned to stay with it long enough to understand it. Over time, the difference between restlessness and focus becomes visible not just in achievements, but in the quality of life itself. A restless mind feels constantly behind, always catching up, never settled. A focused mind, even in difficulty, carries a sense of direction. It knows what it is building, even if the process is slow. And in that knowing, there is stability. Because what a restless mind abandons halfway, a focused mind completes with quiet persistence. And it is in that completion that real transformation begins to take shape. Not every thought deserves a voice, because the mind is not only a source of truth, but also a place where uncertainty, fear, and emotion constantly pass through like passing weather. Some thoughts arrive shaped by wisdom, but many arrive shaped by reaction. And in that moment where something rises within you, it may feel urgent, it may feel real, it may even feel necessary to express. But urgency is not always clarity, and intensity is not always truth. There is a difference between what is felt and what is understood, and in that difference lies the space where restraint becomes power. When every thought is spoken without pause, communication begins to lose its depth. Words start to overlap with emotion rather than meaning, and what could have been understood calmly becomes entangled in reaction. A single unfiltered thought can shift the direction of a conversation, sometimes in ways that cannot be reversed. This is why silence in many moments is not emptiness, but protection. It allows thoughts to settle before they take form, to be observed before they are expressed, to be filtered through awareness instead of released through impulse. In that small gap between thought and speech, maturity begins to reveal itself. There are thoughts that are born from misunderstanding, yet feel completely justified in the moment they arise. There are thoughts shaped by fear that disguise themselves as certainty, and there are thoughts influenced by past experiences that no longer belong to the present situation. If all of these are spoken without reflection, they begin to build narratives that may not be accurate, but still become powerful once released. This is how many unnecessary conflicts begin, not from truth itself, but from unexamined thoughts given immediate voice. The mind produces, but awareness must decide what is worth sharing. Choosing not to speak every thought does not mean suppressing expression. It means refining it. It is the ability to recognize that expression gains strength when it is intentional rather than impulsive. A thought held for a moment longer often changes shape. It becomes less reactive, more thoughtful, more aligned with what truly needs to be said. And sometimes it disappears entirely, revealing that it was never important enough to carry into speech. This quiet selection is not limitation, but clarity. Over time, this discipline reshapes the way a person communicates with the world. Their words begin to carry weight not because they are frequent, but because they are considered. People begin to listen differently, not because more is being said, but because less is being wasted. And in that refinement, something subtle but powerful emerges. A presence where speech is no longer driven by every passing thought, but guided by awareness that understands the value of what remains unspoken. True emotional mastery is not seen in the moments when life is calm, but in the moments when it tries to pull you into chaos and you still choose not to be dragged by it. Anyone can appear balanced when nothing is being tested, when words are gentle and situations are light. But real strength is revealed when pressure rises, when emotions are triggered, when misunderstanding or frustration begins to build inside the chest. In those moments, the instinct to react becomes strong, almost automatic. Yet between what is felt and what is expressed, there exists a small but powerful space, and it is in that space that control either lives or disappears. Loud reactions often give the illusion of strength because they are immediate, intense, and visible. But intensity is not the same as power. A reaction is often the release of unprocessed emotion, not the direction of controlled thought. When emotion takes the lead without awareness, it speaks faster than understanding can follow. And in that speed, meaning is often lost. What begins as a small misunderstanding can grow into something larger simply because it was met with heat instead of clarity. Emotional mastery, however, slows that moment down. It does not deny what is felt, but it refuses to let what is felt decide everything in that instant. There is a quiet discipline in not reacting immediately. It is the discipline of allowing emotion to pass through awareness instead of becoming action. In that pause, something important happens. The mind begins to separate fact from feeling, intention from assumption, and reality from interpretation. What felt overwhelming a moment ago begins to soften when observed instead of expressed, and often what seemed urgent to respond to no longer carries the same weight once it has been understood more clearly. This is how emotional control transforms experience, not by suppressing emotion, but by giving it time to be seen fully before it is released outward. People who master their emotions are not people who feel less. They are people who understand more. They understand that every reaction leaves a trace, and not every moment deserves to be shaped by impulse. Their strength is not in volume, but in restraint. Not in how quickly they respond, but in how wisely they choose to respond at all. In conversations, conflicts, or moments of pressure, they remain steady, not because they are unaffected, but because they are not controlled by what affects them. Over time, this kind of emotional discipline becomes a defining presence. It creates a sense of stability that others can feel, even without explanation. While loud reactions may be remembered for a moment, controlled responses are remembered for their impact, And in that difference lies true power, not the power to react without thinking, but the power to feel deeply and still remain guided by awareness instead of impulse. Wealth grows where patience lives, because wealth is never truly a moment. It is a process unfolding quietly in time. It does not rush toward those who demand it, nor does it stay with those who treat it as something fragile and temporary. Instead, it responds to consistency, to decisions repeated with discipline, and to actions that are sustained long after motivation fades. Many people misunderstand wealth as a sudden arrival, but in reality, it is the slow accumulation of choices that appear small in the beginning yet become powerful when repeated over time. Patience in this sense is not passive waiting, it is active restraint. It is the ability to continue building even when results are not immediate, even when progress feels invisible, even when comparison tries to create doubt. Without patience, financial effort becomes unstable. A person may start with energy, but abandon direction when outcomes do not appear quickly enough. And in that abandonment, potential is interrupted before it has the chance to mature. Wealth requires time, not because it is difficult to earn, but because it requires discipline to hold on to what is earned and allow it to grow. There is a quiet transformation that happens when patience becomes part of financial behavior. Spending begins to carry awareness instead of impulse. Saving becomes a habit instead of an occasional decision. Planning starts to replace reaction. In this shift, money is no longer treated as something that simply flows in and out, but as something that can be shaped over time. The focus moves from immediate satisfaction to long-term stability, and in that shift, the foundation of real wealth begins to form. Impatience often creates cycles that feel productive but remain unsteady. Quick decisions lead to quick losses, and quick gains often disappear just as fast as they arrive. Without patience, even opportunity can become unstable, because it is not given enough time to develop fully. Wealth does not reward speed, it rewards endurance. It grows in the background of consistency, in decisions made when no one is watching, in the quiet discipline of choosing stability over urgency. Over time, patience changes not only financial outcomes, but also the mindset behind them. It teaches restraint where impulse once led, and clarity where urgency once dominated. It allows a person to see money not as something to chase constantly, but as something that responds to structure and time. And as this understanding deepens, wealth becomes less about sudden effort and more about steady direction. In the end, patience becomes more than a virtue in financial growth. It becomes the environment in which wealth is able to exist and expand. Without it, money may come and go, but with it, even small beginnings can slowly transform into something lasting, stable, and quietly powerful. Everything a person experiences in the outer world is first shaped in a place that cannot be seen. Before actions are taken, before words are spoken, before decisions become visible, there is a quiet formation happening within the mind. Thoughts begin to gather, beliefs begin to form, and interpretations begin to take shape. This inner world becomes the lens through which life is perceived, and that lens determines how situations are understood long before they are responded to. What is inside does not stay inside for long. It gradually influences everything that follows. When the inner world is filled with clarity, the outer world begins to feel more structured, even in uncertain situations. Challenges are still present, but they are no longer overwhelming in the same way because the mind has been trained to interpret them with balance rather than fear. A clear inner state does not remove difficulty, but it changes the relationship with difficulty. Instead of reacting with confusion, there is reflection. Instead of collapse, there is adjustment. This shift is subtle, yet it shapes outcomes in ways that are often only understood in hindsight. On the other hand, when the inner world is dominated by doubt, fear, or unresolved tension, Those internal patterns begin to reflect outwardly. Conversations become heavier, decisions become less certain, and opportunities may be overlooked not because they are absent, but because they are not recognized clearly. The outer world does not always change first. Perception does. And once perception changes, experience begins to follow. This is why two people can live through similar circumstances and yet walk away with entirely different realities. It is not the situation alone that defines the outcome, but the internal state through which the situation is processed. There is also a deeper layer to this connection between inner and outer reality. The mind does not only interpret life, it actively participates in shaping it through repeated thought patterns and consistent emotional responses. What is frequently imagined, feared, or believed begins to influence behavior, often without conscious awareness. Small decisions accumulate, habits form, and those habits gradually create visible results. In this way, the inner world becomes a silent architect, designing outcomes long before they fully appear in the external environment. As awareness of this connection grows, responsibility begins to shift inward. Instead of looking outward for constant change, attention turns toward the quality of thoughts, emotions, and internal dialogue. This does not mean denying reality, but understanding its origin more deeply. When the inner world is nurtured with intention, through reflection, discipline, and clarity, the outer world begins to respond differently, not because circumstances are instantly transformed, but because perception and action begin to align more consciously. In the end, what a person consistently carries within themselves becomes the foundation of what they repeatedly experience outside. The outer world is not separate from the inner one. It is shaped by it, shaped quietly, moment by moment, through the thoughts that are allowed to stay and the beliefs that are allowed to grow. Control is often misunderstood as restriction, as if it is something that limits freedom. But real control is not about reducing life. It is about removing the chaos that prevents life from being lived with clarity. When a person learns to govern their reactions, their impulses, and their inner responses, something subtle begins to change. The world outside does not suddenly become easier, but it becomes less able to disturb the center within. And in that shift, a new kind of strength begins to emerge, one that does not depend on circumstances behaving perfectly. Most of what feels like external control is actually internal response. People are not shaped only by what happens to them, but by how quickly they surrender their inner stability to what happens. A single comment can change a mood, a small setback can disrupt focus, and an unexpected situation can alter the direction of an entire day. But these moments only gain power when they are allowed to enter without resistance, without awareness, and without pause. When there is no control inside, everything outside feels stronger than it truly is. Self-control creates a kind of distance between stimulus and response. In that distance, choice becomes possible. Instead of reacting automatically, there is room to observe. Instead of being pulled into every emotional wave, there is the ability to decide whether it deserves participation. This is not detachment from life, but engagement with it in a more conscious way. The external world continues to move, but it no longer dictates internal direction with the same ease. And in that difference, stability begins to form. There is also a quiet freedom that comes with mastering oneself. When emotions are no longer unpredictable rulers and impulses are no longer constant drivers, attention returns to what truly matters. Energy is no longer wasted on constant reaction, but directed toward intention. Conversations become clearer, decisions become more deliberate, and even challenges begin to feel more manageable. Not because life has changed, but because the internal response to life has changed. Over time, this practice builds resilience that cannot easily be shaken. External events may still arrive without warning, but they no longer define the internal state with the same authority. A controlled mind does not mean a silent mind, it means a guided one. Thoughts still appear, emotions still arise, but they are no longer left to lead without awareness. Instead, they are understood, processed, and placed in perspective before they influence action. In the end, when control is developed within, external forces gradually lose their ability to dominate experience. Life continues to move with its uncertainties, but the center remains steady. And in that steadiness, something powerful becomes clear. Nothing outside can truly take control unless what is inside first allows it.